If you are waiting for life to get easier before you start being happy, you are missing the entire point of the journey. Hello, and welcome back to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Grab your coffee, or if you're driving, just settle in, because today we are going on a journey. We are going to explore the architecture of the human spirit. I've been reading a book recently, a collection of stories, essays, and philosophical musings called Seeds for the Soul. Courage and Love for Life. Or, in the original Vietnamese, had Jong Tam Han. Now, usually, when people hear inspirational stories, they roll their eyes. We think of cheesy posters in a dentist's office with a picture of a kitten hanging from a branch that says, "Hang in there." But this is different. This book digs into the soil of human existence. It asks the hard questions about why we suffer, why we dream, and ultimately, what keeps us standing when the storm hits. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to talk about silkworms, about trees that are beaten with newspapers, about 87-year-old college students, and about the tragic mistake of saving your best underwear for a special occasion. Let's start at the very beginning, the foundation. The book opens with a premise that I think we all intuitively know but often try to ignore: life is not designed to be easy. In fact, the editors argue that life is a journey filled with profound disappointment. That's a heavy opener, isn't it? But they follow it up with a beautiful counter-argument. They say that everyone, whether you're an orphan dreaming of a mother, a disabled child dreaming of walking, or just someone stuck in a dead-end job, possesses a fierce desire to live. And this brings us to our first major concept, the necessity of struggle. There's a story in the book about a silkworm. You might have heard variations of this, but let's really look at it. A man finds a cocoon. He watches it for days. Finally, a small crack appears. The butterfly inside is struggling. It's beating its body against the shell, trying to force its swollen body through this tiny hole. It looks agonizing. It looks like torture. The man, out of kindness, and this is key, his motivation is kindness, decides to help. He takes a pair of scissors and snips the remaining bit of the cocoon. The butterfly emerges easily. It flops out. But there's a problem. Its body is swollen, and its wings are shriveled. The man waits for the wings to expand, to dry out, to support the butterfly. But they never do. That butterfly spends the rest of its short life crawling around with a swollen body and withered wings. It never flies. Here is the why it matters part. The struggle was the process. The restriction of that tiny hole forces fluid from the butterfly's body into its wings. The pain of the squeeze is what generates the strength for flight. By bypassing the struggle, the man bypassed the growth. How often do we do this in our own lives? We try to hack our way to success. We try to shield our children from every disappointment. We want the flight without the squeeze. But the philosophy here is brutal and beautiful. You cannot choose where you are born, you cannot choose the cocoon. But the will to endure, that internal pressure you exert against the world, is what gives you wings. This idea of necessary adversity gets expanded in another story that I absolutely love. It's about a man named Dr. Gibbs. Dr. Gibbs is a neighbor of the narrator. He plants a forest of young trees. But he does something weird. He never waters them. And occasionally he walks out with a rolled-up newspaper and smacks the trunks of the trees. It looks insane. The narrator, meanwhile, is pampering his own trees, watering them, fertilizing them, giving them the good life. Years later, a massive storm rolls through. The narrator's pampered trees? They get ripped out of the ground. Why? Because they had easy water on the surface. Their roots were shallow. They never had to go looking for anything. But Dr. Gibbs' trees? They didn't budge. Because he didn't water them, those saplings had to send their roots deep, deep into the bedrock to find moisture. The adversity, the lack of surface comfort, created structural integrity. I think about this constantly in the context of the modern world. We live in an era of surface water. We have on-demand everything. Food, entertainment, validation, it's all right there on the surface. And the question this story poses is, if a storm comes, do you have roots? Have you been forced to dig deep? Because if you haven't, you might just topple over. Now, let's pivot slightly. If struggle is the soil, then perspective is the sunlight. There's a story in the book called The Good News. It challenges our definition of loss. A student wins a creative competition, a big cash prize. As he's walking to his car, a woman approaches him, weeping. She tells him a horrific story about her dying child who needs a surgery she can't afford. The student, moved by compassion, hands her the envelope. All the money. He gives it away. A few days later, a friend comes to him and says, "Hey, I heard about that woman. You got scammed. She has no sick child. She's a con artist." Now pause. How would you react? Anger? Humiliation? Regret? The student smiles and says, "That is the best news I've heard today." The friend is confused. The student explains, "You mean there is no child dying in agony? That's wonderful." This is a masterclass in reframing. Most of us are attached to the money or the ego of being right. The student was attached to the value of life. By shifting his perspective, he realized that losing money is infinitely better than the reality of a suffering child. He refused to let the scam tarnish his spirit. It's a radical form of optimism that I think we could all use a bit more of. But let's get into the texture of time. One of the most poignant themes in these first few chapters is the concept of immediacy. There is a story that will break your heart, and then put it back together. It's about a man whose wife has just passed away. He's going through her things, and he finds a box. Inside is a piece of exquisite silk lingerie. It has the price tag still on it. It was bought in New York years ago. His wife never wore it. She was saving it for a special occasion. The man looks at the silk and says, "She was waiting for a special occasion. And now, the occasion is her funeral." He realizes something profound. There is no such thing as a special occasion in the future. Today is the special occasion. Just being alive, breathing, having a Tuesday morning, that is the event. This story bleeds into the narrative of the narrator's sister in a later chapter. After her sister dies, the narrator stops saving her good china for guests. She uses the crystal glasses to drink water when she loses 1 pound. She wears her best clothes to the grocery store. She stops saying, "Someday." The phrase that anchors this section is famous, but in this context, it hits harder. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift, which is why it is called the present. It sounds like a cliché until you are holding the unworn lingerie of a dead loved one. Then it becomes a command. It demands that we stop living in the waiting room of life. If you have something to say, say it. If you have something to wear, wear it. The book argues that regret isn't usually about what we did, it's about the small things we delayed. The letter unwritten. The trip not taken. And speaking of, it's never too late. We have to talk about Rose. Rose is an 87-year-old woman who enrolls in college. She's a firecracker. She becomes the campus icon. She's not just passing time, she's vibrant. She gives a speech at the end of the year, and her cue cards fall on the floor. Instead of panicking, she cracks a joke into the microphone, clears her throat, and delivers wisdom that defines the difference between aging and growing. She says, "We do not stop playing because we are old, we grow old because we stop playing." She distinguishes between growing older and growing up. Getting older happens automatically. If you lie in bed for a year, you will turn a year older. That takes no talent. But growing requires finding the opportunity in change. It requires having a dream. She says, "When you lose your dreams, you die." There are people walking around who are dead at 30 because they stopped dreaming. Rose graduates, fulfills her dream, and dies peacefully 1 week later. She squeezed every drop out of the lemon. So, we have the necessity of struggle, the power of perspective, and the urgency of time. Now, let's talk about agency and reinvention. Sometimes the path we are on is blocked. The book tells the story of Annie Johnson. We're going back to 1903 Arkansas. Annie is a black woman, her marriage has failed, she has 2 toddlers, and she has no money. In 1903, her options were essentially domestic servant or nothing. But Annie refuses to leave her children to raise someone else's. She decides to invent a third option. She looks at the cotton mill and the sawmill in her town. She realizes the workers have no place to eat lunch. Now, listen to the grit in this story. She wants to sell meat pies. But to test if she's physically capable, she fills 2 5-gallon buckets with stones. She carries them for miles, simulating the journey she would have to take with her food stand. She practices the labor before she even makes a dime. She sets up a mobile food stall. She cooks the pies on an open fire. She walks between the 2 mills. She creates a market where there wasn't one. She creates a dependency. The workers start waiting for her pies. She eventually builds a store. Why does this matter? Because Annie Johnson didn't wait for a loan. She didn't wait for permission. She literally carried buckets of rocks to prove to herself that she could do it. It's a story about stepping off the path. When the road ends, you don't stop walking. You cut a new trail. And sometimes, that new trail involves helping others to help yourself. There's a beautiful vignette about 2 boys. One is an orphan who dreams of flying. The other is a boy with paralyzed legs who dreams of running. Separately, they are defined by their limitations. But they find a synergy. The orphan puts the paralyzed boy on his back. He runs. He runs as fast as he can through the park. The wind hits the paralyzed boy's face, and he spreads his arms and screams, "I'm flying!" In that moment, the orphan is flying too. By lending his legs, he achieved the sensation of flight through his friend. This is a crucial seed for the soul. We often think we need to solve our own problems first. But often, the solution to our emptiness is found in filling someone else's cup. It's the law of reciprocity. Now we need to go deeper. We need to talk about connection and the soul. The book takes a somber turn with the story of the swans. A young man is working on his grandparents' farm. He notices the deep, quiet bond between his grandparents. And he notices the grandfather's swans on the lake. The grandfather explains that swans are soulmates. If one dies, the other often dies shortly after, not from disease, but from a broken heart. They refuse to eat. They fade away. Tragically, the grandmother passes away from a stroke. And the grandfather, this rugged, tough farmer, begins to fade. He dies shortly after, of the same cause. The narrator realizes that his grandfather was telling him the truth about the swans to explain his own heart. This illustrates the sheer power of human connection. It's not just a social contract, it's a biological tether. But, and here is where the book offers a counterweight, there is also a story about a grandfather who chooses to stay. In a later chapter, we meet a different grandfather. He is dying of emphysema. He's bitter. He's angry at the world. He's lost his wife. But he has a 12-year-old granddaughter. He can't speak anymore because of throat surgery. But one day, the granddaughter visits him. The old man summons every ounce of energy he has left. He wants to communicate one thing. He writes in the condensation on a glass of water. He writes 2 letters L and U. Love you? He lives for weeks longer than the doctors predicted. Why? Because the love for that little girl gave him a reason to endure the next breath. So we have the swans who die from love, and the grandfather who lives for love. They are 2 sides of the same coin. Love is the most potent force in these stories. It is the anchor that holds us, and it is the wind that moves us. Finally, I want to touch on healing. We've talked about struggle, action, and love. But what happens when you are just tired? When the soul is paralyzed? There is a story about a narrator who is burned out. He goes to see an old country doctor. He expects pills. He expects a medical diagnosis. Instead, the doctor asks him about his favorite childhood place. The man says, "The beach." The doctor gives him 4 prescriptions. But they aren't for the pharmacy. He tells him to go to the beach for a day. Prescription 1, listen. Listen to the ocean. Stop listening to your own thoughts. Get out of your head and into the sensory world. Prescription 2, reach back. Think about the happy memories. The brain can only focus on one thing at a time. If you flood it with the past joy, you displace the present anxiety. Prescription 3, examine your motives. This is the hard one. The doctor suggests that burnout comes from self-centeredness. Are you working to serve, or are you working to win? When you shift to service, like the orphan carrying the boy, the burden becomes lighter. And the final prescription? Write your worries in the sand. The narrator goes to the beach. He takes a stick. He writes down everything that is keeping him awake at night. The mortgage, the job, the loneliness. He writes it all in the wet sand. And then, the tide comes in. It washes over the words. The sand is smoothed out. The worries are physically erased. It's a ritual of letting go. It's a reminder that nothing is permanent. The ocean is bigger than your problems. The tide will always come in. So, how do we tie all of this together? We started with the silkworm. We learned that the struggle is necessary to build our wings. We looked at Dr. Gibbs trees and learned that we need deep roots to survive the storms, and those roots only grow when the surface is dry. We learned from the student with the good news that our perspective defines our reality. We learned from the lingerie story that waiting for a special occasion is a trap. Today is the gift. We saw Annie Johnson carrying buckets of rocks, proving that we can pave our own road. We saw the power of love to both break us and sustain us. And finally, we learned to write our worries in the sand. The book is called Seeds for the Soul, for a reason. A seed doesn't look like much. It's small. It's hard. It looks dead. But buried inside that hard shell is a fierce desire to live. It just needs to be planted. It needs to push against the dirt. It needs to struggle toward the light. My hope for you, after listening to this, is that you look at your own struggles a little differently today. Maybe that difficult boss is your cocoon. Maybe that financial tight spot is forcing your roots to go deeper. Maybe today is the day you finally wear that nice shirt or call that friend. Don't let the butterfly die in the cocoon. Don't wait for the water. Go deep. Thank you for listening. Keep growing.